As you're watching this documentary, the first thing we'd like to say is thank you. This project has been our passion. This will go through the recent history, documenting the rise of the podcast. We'll start at the very beginning, way back in the 1980s, when podcasting first started. But back then, it was called audio blogging. This is well before the advent of the World Wide Web. In the 1980s, RCS, or Radio Computing Services, provided music and talk-related software in a digital format. And in the early 1990s, we now started to have radio-style talk shows, but on the computer. And in 1993, Carl Malleman launched Internet Talk Radio, which was the first computer talk radio show, each week interviewing a computer expert. It was described as audio files that computer users fetched one by one. We have to say, what a super snappy name that is. Now, downloading music did not reach critical mass until the launch of Napster, and this helped the mass media get used to the idea of downloading what we want, when we want it. In 2001, Albion Technologies of San Francisco introduced Replay Radio, later renamed Replay AV. This was like a TiVo recorder, but for internet radio shows. The best feature was a direct download link, which would scan the radio publisher's sites for new files and copy them directly to the user's hard disk. The first radio show to publish in this format was Web Talk Guy's World Radio Show, produced by Rob and Dana Greenlee. Web Talk Guy's World Radio, produced by Rob and Dana Greenlee, was one of the first podcasts ever produced. Have you ever heard of it?
Yeah, I did hear about the Web Talk Guys, but only after I started looking into podcasting and obviously looking at and researching it before I started. I think it's one of them situations where whenever you're a pioneer or something and wanting to do something different and unique and you're sort of ahead of the curve, as it were, you very often get ridiculed, or at the very least don't get the respect and credit you deserve until years later, when it becomes a meme or becomes normal or part of the regular society, which podcasting's become. But if you think about any other sort of companies that have done something new, it takes time for stuff to become relevant and part of everyday life. And it happened with Facebook, it happened with YouTube, even MySpace to a degree. Twitter is a great example of that, where Twitter, no one ever thought Twitter would become what it is now, where it's everybody uses, a lot of people use it, and it's got bigger and bigger since it started. So it's the same deal with podcasting. So I obviously give them the credit for being the first ones, but really I think personally the people who deserve the credit for making podcasting an industry as big as it is now is Ricky Gervais, really. And I know that if you'd ask anyone in the UK in particular, that'll definitely be the answer that comes up the most, because that is the most downloaded podcast in history, and I understand why. I mean, I personally think they're great, and I know there's the odd people I do meet who do think that they're not good, that it's not good at all, and I can understand that. They're entitled to their opinion, but for me, I understand why so many people downloaded it, because obviously it was a new thing. I mean, to the point of that they actually created the name of it because they weren't actually sure, what to call it. I think I believe that I'm right in saying that they started in The Guardian, because obviously they started with XFM, the London radio show, and then decided to branch that off and did podcasting for The Guardian, I think it was, and then they did the individual ones, the podcast download ones. But I remember listening to Ricky Gervais talk about it in interviews, saying, that he convinced them that we should do this, and it's a new form of doing something, and we might be pioneers of it. So he kind of knew what he was doing, but he didn't know how big it could get. And he clearly touched on something, because having hundreds of millions of downloads since it started, shows the content was great first and foremost, but he created an avenue that no one had ever explored before. I mean, well, I say no one ever explored before. Obviously, these web talk guys did, and I was reading about it at the time. So you credit them for being the first ones, but that often is the case until somebody comes along who's more sort of mainstream, who gives it not necessarily credence, but at least more exposure to a worldwide, or at least a bigger audience, I suppose, not just a worldwide audience, but a bigger one. That's when it becomes, part of culture and part of everyday thinking, and I really do, I say I really do. It's common knowledge really that everyone sort of says that Ricky Gervais deserves huge credit for that happening, because really that was the start of it, and until really it sort of took but it took another 4 or 5 years really before it started becoming popular in America, and you started seeing the podcasts that are still around now. I mean, one of the things after Ricky Gervais, podcasting wise, that got me into podcasting was Nerdist, and I know that they've been around 8 years or so it kind of shows how long it took before it really got to the mainstream audience. And yeah, so you've got Nerdist, and you can, but the interesting thing, and I know I was going to bring this up, is that you look at the UK scene, and who could you name other than Ricky Gervais really? Other than, I mean, there's certain people that I mean, Richard Herring is really, I think, the mainstream one in the UK, but any of the other ones that are known on YouTube or various other formats are all living in America. So because they know where the audience is, and so we're the ones sort of waiting for the podcasting industry in the UK to be as big as it is in America. But if you can name probably 50 podcasts in America that are well known worldwide and are constantly on the iTunes charts, and there's no real comparison over here, because it just hasn't took off yet. But yeah, they're the guys who deserve the credit for making it mainstream, and then obviously but the people who then took that formula, and Nerdist, and I mean, I'm just naming ones I like. I mean, you can name a million of them, but W2F with Mark Maron, I can name a bunch of them. Joe Rogan, I'm a huge fan of his. I like Jim Cornette's one. I like a lot of wrestling ones. I used to be a wrestler, and so they've all jumped on the bandwagon and created their own stuff. Them being involved in it and consistently doing shows a week now and making it a thing, consistently doing it, because Ricky did it for a little bit of time, and now they don't do any. So, now the ones that are doing it weekly and consistently are the ones that deserve the credit. But, kudos to the guys who started it first, and I'm glad they're getting some sort of recognition by being brought up in questions like this. But I'd say Ricky and that were the ones that made it a thing, even created the word. People had to find what word it was. So there you go.
Okay, let's move on to the podcasters then. When was your first recording session?
My first session, recorded session, was January 2013. I originally started my freelance company in October of 2012, because basically I was running a community radio station, and really enjoyed it, and enjoyed the sort of practical experience it gave me, but it kind of pigeonholed me in what I wanted to do. And I wanted to kind of do stuff that interested me, and wanted to talk to scientists and talk about, I wanted to be more curious and not sort of talk about conventional stuff all the time, and do, even though I was kind of in control of the content, it felt like I wasn't in control of the content. And I think the thing that pushed me over the edge was when I was doing my own show, I really didn't enjoy the content I was making, even on my own show. I felt I was hamstrung in myself. But it was because there was other people having a say in what we did, and it was just it wasn't progressing. So I basically decided to make my own freelance thing to be a youth worker, which is what I did to pay the bills. And then I set up at the beginning of 2013 Geek Apocalypse. And the reason we did it in January 2013 is because Graham Dunn and I, he's a friend of mine, who did the website, we basically decided to do 5 podcasts on one page, and so we did that to be able to fill the page up, basically. So I went from, in January, having no podcasts and no bookings at all, to going, right, you need to book 5 podcasts by March 31st so we can put them all up So we have like a variation of podcasts, and we can fill the page up if you're going to do 5 a show, because that really meant something to me. I could have put one up and no one would have cared because no one knew it existed, but I stuck to that, and I thought I wanted the site to look good, so that's what I ended up doing. So we did all 5. Managed to do it, and then they got released on the 31st. So it was sometime in January when I did the first one with Robbie, probably mid-January. So that was when the first recording took place, but in terms of when they first got broadcast, it was 31st of March 2013 is when the first 5 got uploaded along with the website. So take your pick. So the real answer and the broadcast answer.
Why did you start a podcast?
I started a podcast because as I was running a community radio station, and I didn't like the restrictions it had, because anyone who's worked in a community radio station, it's limited in its scope. You're only really talking to a sort of local audience, a regional audience is what I'm looking to say, and that has a very limited scope, and you're sort of heading towards a blockade. You're not heading for the stars, you're heading for just average, really, and that didn't interest me at all. So because it didn't interest me, I was like, well, I'm gonna do stuff that I like and do it myself and not have someone have a say in it. Now, obviously, the downside is you're not going to get paid for it, and it's going to take some time for that to happen. But since I've done that, it's sort of the happiest thing. It was the best thing I ever did in terms of my happiness. I love doing the stuff that I do, and the challenge is finding its usefulness, and I know that the content I do is good. I really enjoy it, and I think that was the biggest sort of commitment, really, is to go, I really like this. It's similar to what I experienced in doing, and I just wanted to have an avenue where I can showcase what I like and invite people on who have similar interests, but also people who have no interests similar to me at all, because I want to learn and grow and ask people questions, and that's something I learned about the podcasts that were happening at the time that were just starting out, like Nerdist and Joe Rogan's one, where he's just like, let's ask questions. I mean, maybe not at the beginning of when I started the show, but that's certainly what's influenced me since I started. Just having the ability to ask someone a question and give people the time to answer it. I mean, I think that's incredibly useful, incredibly fun, and I love listening to people. And having a debate with people, and that's the great thing about podcasting. It gives you an avenue. Even when I've had friends on, I've had friends who have told me stories that I've never heard before, because we've had an avenue of sitting down in a formal environment, as informal as the podcast is, and they just feel comfortable enough to go, oh, I'll tell you this story, and I'm like, wow, I didn't know that. I've had my friends on of 20 years. I remember I think it was the 50th or something. I can't quite remember, or maybe it was my birthday or something, where we did a podcast where one of my friends of 20 years said a story I hadn't heard, and that never would have happened unless I had invited him on the podcast. So yeah, it creates a great opportunity for people to speak about their opinion, and also to provide the context of why they think that way, rather than the sort of conventional interviews you get where they take a soundbite of a longer piece of interview and sort of go, oh my god, this person said this, and you don't know the context because they won't broadcast it, whereas we broadcast the whole thing, however long it is. And how I usually determine how long a podcast is how well it's going. So if the conversation's going really well, I'll keep it going, but I've had podcasts where, we're struggling to hit an hour, because they're just very nervous, because some people don't like talking for that long, but I really like it. And I think it's teaching sort of mainstream media about not spoon feeding information, that we want to know the whole information, we want to make our own informed decisions. I'm not saying, every podcast has to be politically motivated or whatever, or trying to teach people how to think, but, because really we're in the entertainment business, we have to be entertaining first and foremost, but that podcasting has that edge to it that I really like. And I think we've been spoon-fed too much reality TV. I hate conventional TV in the UK in particular. Like, well, hate maybe is a strong word, but it isn't for me. There's no shows that are made for me in the UK. I'm not interested in any of it, and there's nothing that makes me want to buy a TV. I don't own a TV. You know, I don't own a way of having TV in this country. Everything I watch is on the internet and predominantly from America, because they make the best shows. You know, they spend time and effort on them and make stuff that I like and I'm interested in. And that's kind of the problem. You know, because everything that they spend a great deal of money on, especially with us being a smaller country than America, is like reality TV. And I think there's an element of people are now aware that reality TV is scripted. So some people have kind of started to resent reality TV having too much of it. And sort of podcasting is part of this new media group of people where it's like, we want something real again, which is why all these serious dramas, I think, are popular. And this is my take on it. And podcasting has become popular because it's an avenue for people to talk about real, honest, genuine things, rather than reality TV that's scripted to look that way, but is furthest from it as you would want to believe. And I know that for a fact. I've actually witnessed reality TV shows be like, right, you say this and then you fight with that person. And so I think that's why podcasting has a certain advantage, and that's why they're popular. But that's really ultimately why I started it, is because I didn't want someone to say what I could and couldn't say. And obviously, you know, I don't want to say stuff that's distasteful or whatever it is, but, you know, if I'm prepared to say something that may be controversial, but I have my reasons for doing so, I have the perfect avenue to do it. And we've certainly had our fair share of people who have said something that may be perceived as controversial, but as I see as debate, because I believe in free speech, so I believe that people should say what they think about things without fear of being judged, and we certainly don't judge people on the podcast. Otherwise, you know, I wouldn't do it, or at least why would I invite someone on if I'm going to judge them? That just seems foolish. So yeah, it was just the lack of restriction and having the best avenue for me with the personality that I have to be able to talk about stuff, and I definitely fit doing podcasting. It's certainly because of the type of person I am, that I'm interested and curious and about stuff and can communicate, which so it seemed the obvious choice to me.
When did you start feeling comfortable on the microphone?
I really don't. I really think it's going to sound really strange to say, but I think no one ever really gets fully comfortable being on a microphone, and that's going to sound bizarre to some people, but it's really true, and I actually think that's incredibly useful, and here's why. Not being comfortable on the microphone actually really helps in regards to it reminds you that you're doing something that you care about, and so having the ability to care about it, being reminded of that, is a really good motivational tool to keep doing it, because although you're doing something you really want to do, it still requires a great deal of effort and motivation and commitment to want to keep doing it consistently, especially when you first start and you're hardly getting anybody interested in your product. So wanting to do the best you can do and being reminded of that and being sort of scared and anxious and nervous is really good. And very often than not, the most nervous I've been most of the time leads to the best shows, because I'm on my toes and I'm awake and I'm agile and I'm aware of what I'm saying, and it makes me on edge in a good way. So it's just manifesting that to be positive. Obviously this question's meant for people who are so scared of even looking at a microphone, never mind being on one, and I think that's more to do with being comfortable with who you are. You know, even someone like me who's now, you know, seems confident and can talk and be articulate in how I speak, and I can speak my mind, that has been a long drawn out process of getting a lot of stuff wrong, and still getting stuff wrong to this day, and still you know putting my foot in it and whatnot, but that's the deal. That's how you end up getting comfortable, is by having the ability to be okay with your opinion and okay with your voice and what you're going to say. So I never worry about what I'm going to say, because I think about it a great deal before I say something, and I know, because of the person I am, I'm not really going to say anything overly controversial that I'm ever going to regret saying. If I'm in a good frame of mind. I mean, anyone who knows me, mental health issues that can change, but speaking when I'm well and doing stuff to the best of my ability in the normal sense, then yeah, I know what right and wrong is, I suppose, is what I'm saying. So that really helps in regards to being confident on the microphone. I mean, what I will say, and I'm not being egotistical when I say this, but I always have been aware that I've had a natural ability in doing this. I've always been comfortable in talking in front of people, and I've always been comfortable asking questions, and I often used to get ridiculed for that growing up, and I don't really resent that, but I don't resent people being that way, is what I'm saying. But that really is useful later in life, because you learn and develop and grow as a human being, and that helps with just confidence, not just on the microphone but in everyday life. So my natural talent sort of helps, but talent only gets you so far. It really comes down to what I was saying, is hard work and commitment. I mean, to kind of give you the outset of my experiences, is that I did stand-up comedy when I was at university. I've done media stuff since I was at college, which was nearly 10 years ago now. So I've done probably over something like I worked this out recently, something like over 1,000 shows I've been involved in and produced and been part of. So that helps a great deal. But but you may think, well, okay, if I can't do that and can't be involved in shows, how do I get experience? How do I get better? And you just find environments that you can do that, and something as simple as taking over a conversation with a group of friends that you're with. That's a good way of doing it. Because that shows that you're not afraid of running things and voicing your opinion and saying, stuff like that. And I don't suggest going in all guns blazing and doing stand-up comedy and trying to make people laugh, because that is terrifying, regardless of what confidence you have. And I didn't at the time. I was scared endless, which you wouldn't, like any normal person. And I did have times when I died completely, and it was terrible, and it was, you do spend your time going, why am I doing this? But what I mean by getting experiences, maybe go to a community radio station as an option, and learn that way, or even just say to a friend, if you're Skyping over the internet while they're on holiday or something, or like someone who's in a different country or in the different part of the country. Maybe just say to them, would you mind if I interviewed you for a little bit? I'm just trying this technique, or try it out yourself. Try talking out loud. You may look like an idiot, but if no one else is around, only so just try and talk openly. Get a microphone and record yourself just talking and talk. Find a topic, talk about it, and try and get comfortable talking about that subject. And try and have the ability to keep talking and keep talking and keep talking, and then that'll come. But as I say, I had a real sort of identity crisis growing up, where I just was not sure of myself, and I was really geeky at heart, and I loved sci-fi, and I was obsessed with everything, and I was curious and interested, and read a lot, and was into science and board games and video games and comic books, and I refused to accept that, because that was what my family and everyone around me made me feel like. And it was only through sort of accepting who I was and going, you know what, and I'm going to use that in a professional sense and go, I'm going to be the person I want to be and like the stuff that I like. Because the great advantage is anything that comes up with Geek Apocalypse, I'm already a fan of, so it's easy to turn up to. I actually have a case of that I'm after having to turn down stuff. I want to go to everything, which is a great feeling to have. It's not a case of, I've got this party to go to that I don't like. It's like, no, I want to go to everything. So really it's sort of three things. It's like it's being confident in having your own confidence in yourself, and then the confidence in the mic will come. It's experience, which is like sort of tied in with hard work, and having the commitment to do it, and And the third thing is having, doing something that interests you is a really huge advantage. So if you're doing something if you're talking about a subject that you're really interested in, that's far easier to talk about than something you couldn't care less about. So yeah, that would be my advice on getting more confident. But the sort of harsh reality of it is, and it's difficult to accept at first, is you're never going to be 100% comfortable, but don't be afraid of that, because it will make you better at your job. And if you don't feel nervous and you go, this is easy, or whatever it is, then maybe you may need to question whether you really want to do it, because I don't think that should ever leave you. You should always want to do it. You should always be nervous about doing it to some level. It'll get easier, but it'll never go away completely. And it certainly hasn't for me. I still feel that way even now.
Why do you enjoy creating podcasts?
I enjoy creating podcasts because it's different. I've done radio shows in the past, and obviously they have their own restrictions, and I hate doing conventional interviews, and I know I might get some stick for that, but I just don't like doing generic questions, and I understand why people get frustrated with them when they get interviewed. And I've done conventional interviews, like being interviewed for conventional interviews, and I don't like not having a thought process when I'm thinking about stuff, because I can come up with different variations of the same answer and make it sound interesting. I'm not going to do the whole thing of like, so why did you start said company, and just say, well, sound like a good idea, the end. That's dull and not interesting, and I really want to know the sort of ins and outs and stuff, and I know that some people might not be interested in that, but to me, I think it's interesting. So I want to have the ability to be able to ask the interesting, curious questions that I might never get to ask. And that's sort of the advantage of having a format like podcasting. You have the ability to stretch that out, to talk about whatever it is that you want. And sort of the stuff that maybe a more famous person gets asked all the time, you can crowbar that into like an hour show. And that's only like 5 minutes of that. Whereas if they did like a 10-minute, interview for a film, the problem with the 10-minute interview techniques is that they're all about the content. So the content they're creating is about the content that they're promoting. So it'll be about the film. Whereas if you got a person on a podcast, the content is the person who's on. So you're selling the person, not just the content that they do. And I think that actually is a better way of selling stuff, but because it always puzzles me. If you hear like a blockbuster film coming out and you get the mainstream guy going on a mainstream chat show on TV, that all they talk about is they talk about the film, like majority of it's about the film and about what they did on the film, like ha 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 ha, and it never sells it for me. It never ever sells it for me, because basically the people who hear about it are going to know about it anyway and going to go to it. So basically you're trying to preach to the people who are unsure about spending what is hard disposable income. It's very limited in this day and age, to go and see said film, and they just go and see the film. Like, that's enough to kind of be ordered into going there, because you get spoon fed in that environment. You get spoon fed to go, the film is on Friday, go and see it, I'm in it, thank you very much. Like, that's enough. And I've never worked that way. I've never seen a film and go, like, regardless of who it is, like, I'm a huge fan of Will Smith, but if I look at a film that he's in and go, that doesn't look very good, and yet he may convince me in an interview if he mentions why it's interesting and that, but it's never done that way. It's always kind of done in a well, I'm in it, go and see it. And if you don't go and see it, that's your fault. Look what you're missing out. I'm like, I'm fine, thanks. I'll not go and see it. So it's quite interesting. I like having the freedom to showcase what I enjoy and invite people on that like similar stuff or even not similar stuff and debate about it, because that's what it is. It's about approaching these things with an open mind. And I use geek as a verb, to be geeky, which just means like sort of be interested and obsessed about something, and we're all geeky about something, so I try and find out what that is and we talk about it on the show, and I have such a curious mind that there's very little that comes up where I'm like, that's really dull. I know you've talked about horses on the podcast once, And it's something I never thought I'd be interested in, and there I was asking a zillion questions about it, because I was like, ooh, I've never explored this line of conversation before, and that's what gets me out of bed and gets me interested about things. So having a podcast that does that is a huge plus for me. It makes me very happy, and what I think I'm most proud of as well is that the people who have been on have often said afterwards that, like, that was really fun, and that's like, you know, I feel great and confident, and I'm like, because I seem to have this ability to get people comfortable with talking about anything, because mental health comes up a lot on our show, for example, and it's obviously a taboo subject and sort of it's a common subject on ours, probably because I'm open and honest to talk about what I've went through, which I think is what makes my podcast worth listening to. I'm not shy away. I don't shy from anything really. Prepared to talk about anything, and that's the huge amount. That's what makes podcasts unique and fun.
What is the worst thing you've ever said in a podcast?
There hasn't been anything really ultimately bad that's happened that has made me sort of not have them involved in podcasting. The only real thing that came up that I wanted to get rid of was there was a joke in the first show about, we were talking about stunts in films, and Robbie, my friend who was the first one on the show, made this joke that like they were using terminally ill people and that was actually happening for real when they decapitated people in films and stuff, and I remember sort of laughing like, oh my god, that's awful, but it was all a joke, and it was all, you know, we joked about it for a pretty big segment in the podcast. Remember, and I listened to it back in the build-up to us releasing the first 5, and I was really sort of ambivalent about keeping that bit in. And so I emailed him and basically said, how did you feel about it? And he was fine with it, so he kept it in. And then I'm really glad I did, which sounds strange because, you know, I'm still kind of like, when I listen to it back and even explaining it, I'm going, But then he said it, and I'm a firm believer in free speech, which comes with people having the ability to be offensive and controversial. And we don't edit stuff out of our show. The only reason we would edit out stuff is if we got to the point where that's something like a monumental sound failure where we had to restart, or maybe someone leaves the podcast to go to the toilet, and we may edit that out just because it just sounds odd. But other than that, no, not really. There's nothing really, anything really bad happened. I mean, we get criticism, but that you do not join the media profession and podcast network if you don't expect to get criticism. I mean, we got criticism the first time we did the stream for Twitch, basically saying, you know, who are you to start a Twitch stream? And you want to say to them, well, anyone could start a Twitch stream. You know, it's a free country in that regard. And they say the most meanest things, but that's part of the deal. You're going to have people who don't like your content, but just don't be afraid of being yourself, and that's certainly what I am, and I give people the avenue to be themselves on the show, and I think that's the best way of doing it.
How has the equipment changed since you started podcasting?
Yeah, there's definitely been an equipment change happening because of the resurgence of technology that everyone knows about. But what's beneficial about that is it has less of an influence than it used to. I mean, if you wanted to do podcasting or anything like that a while ago, let's say 10, 15 years ago, it would have cost 10 times as much as it did now, which is why you've got no real excuse for wanting to do podcasting, because it's the cheapest it's ever been, or not just podcasting, anything. So the advantage that has is that it's not necessarily the difference between a good show and a bad show now, because if you just do not make good content, as in it looks good and is filmed good or recorded good, then you're going to get destroyed for that, because you know you can't really turn around now and say I can't afford the equipment or whatever it is, because it's so cheap now. And the reason for that is because it's a bit like I made this argument in a meeting once where I said it's like charity shops. Charity shops used to be just second-hand clothes, and it used to be stuff that the majority of people didn't want, let's face it, and it was and you know, they weren't that popular, at least when I wasn't growing up. I never was in any, and I'm not exactly, you know, privileged, you know, I'm from a working class family in the northeast of England, so but now, the quality of stuff, because I think with the climate the way that it is, and we're probably de-hoarding ourselves with how much stuff the clutter we're getting, which is a good thing. And I'm hoping with the times that we're being a little bit more generous, maybe that's the reason. But with technology, the charity shops are getting technology now, and then the second-hand electrical stores now that you can get the best quality. Because if you think about it, like iPhones and stuff, because everyone wants to stay ahead of the curve, there's different versions coming out really fast, yearly, which never would have happened 10 years ago. So the avenue for that is that stuff gets outdated really quickly and the next best thing comes out. But the next best thing is only a small improvement, and then that really diminishes the amount that it costs to get the latest edition. I have like a year-old iPhone, and it does virtually the same stuff that the next iPhone will do. Only the next iPhone will do stuff a little bit better. But the point I'm making is the quality. Unless you have a keen eye for this stuff, the difference in quality is so minute that really it's not really down to the equipment anymore. It's down to the performer and the talent of the individual, which is good because we're sort of all on an even playing field now. You can't turn around and say, oh, people have better quality equipment than me. That isn't the case really anymore, because you can make high quality shows now for next to no money, but for the least amount of money that's ever been. So what I think the benefit of that is because we're all on an evil playing field, it'll be the people who become popular and become good at this will be the ones who have the talent to be good at it and be slightly better. And so the cream will rise to the top, which is good. So you can't really turn around and say, oh, I'm a great singer, I just recorded badly, and you've not really got that excuse anymore. So equipment used to be a factor, but we've changed very little equipment since we started, because we don't need to, which means you spend your money on other things. So yeah, you don't really spend as much money on equipment than you would think. It's all about buying stuff that you can market the stuff, marketing really, and try and get your podcast more out there. So yeah, it's not as influential as it once was.
Do you think it's a better medium for content creators than, say, YouTube or Patreon?
Okay, yeah. Obviously, apologies for the long-windedness of this answer, but I obviously think this is worth talking about. It's a great question in regards to, is there a better medium for YouTube? Because YouTube kind of, I think, shoots itself in the foot. Obviously, if we solely discuss podcasting, then the great avenue podcast has for content creators is that you're in 100% control of the content. So what I mean by that is that anyone who creates a podcast has 100% control of what comes out of it. So I can't turn around and say, for example, that I can't blame anybody else for what content I produce, because I'm in 100% control and I have final say on everything, right down to sponsorship and how the podcast is structured and where it's put, everything. So that is a huge advantage for the content creator, because they 100% own what they do. But obviously the flip side of that is that it's incredibly difficult to get people to care enough about it to generate money, to give you money to be able to cover the content you're doing without, because usually if you have a company and you want someone to invest in it, you'll give a percentage of your company away, and in this case percentage of your content away. That is much more difficult to do in a podcast sense, and in content on the internet, basically in general, which is what YouTube does. Now, but my problem with YouTube is that the percentage of cut that they take from YouTube creators, I think, is too high for what little YouTube gives back. It's just my honest opinion, and I know I'm not alone in this. I've had many conversations with YouTube creators who have told me the same thing, and the reason I say that is because very often people regard YouTube as an avenue for creators of content to be there, And obviously YouTube tried to do that with the like whatever it was, £100 million I think it was. They reinvested into YouTube and gave grants to particular content creators and say make channels for us of original content. You know, Geek and Sundry started that way, and Nerdist was another one. But were they 100% committed to that? Because having listened to people who got that money, and I mean the other, you know, comment that's worth raising is that, you know, majority of that money was given to Americans, you know, which you can understand, being that it's owned by Google, and Google are obviously an American company, and they go, well, we want to create jobs in our own country, which you get. You know, if I'm going to create jobs, I'm going to create jobs in the place that I'm based. But do I claim to have a worldwide audience that's making worldwide content? No. You know, I'm not going to ask someone from Lithuania to make a podcast, or to make a video, or for something for our YouTube channel. And if I do, and I'm paying everybody, then I'm going to pay them as well. But but YouTube gave all their money when they have a worldwide massive audience, gave all their money to, and I just I don't 100% think that's right or fair. Sort of claim that, you know, everybody should be partnerships with YouTube, and then, you know, they don't really care where the money, you know, would only care about the money going essentially back into their own economy. So they'll probably end up in some bizarre way, you know, they invest in that money, but aren't they getting that back with the ad revenue? If all the ad revenues from American companies is slowly building its way back, so they're really not really spending any money at all. You know, that's open for debate. So yeah, and also a lot of people who did that have then left the sort of YouTube banner and been bought out by other people. So they still use YouTube as an avenue to showcase their content, but they're not mutual partnerships with YouTube. So I guess the problem YouTube had, but I understand it from a business perspective. I've thought about this a bit and have my business hat on and thought, do YouTube 100% care about content creators? And I'm going to explain what I mean. The reason I say that is because, do YouTube really have to care about what content they're creating? Because the whole reason that YouTube became an entity was because anyone can go on and create content on that at any time. You don't have to be a partnership with them to create money. And as I say, with the percentage of what they take being as high as it is, it commits YouTubers to be uploading to YouTube all the time, creating content consistently so they get people to come back, and it's just creating content. So you can make a reasoned argument that they're just making content for content's sake, and maybe it diminishes the quality of it if people are just constantly having to upload all the time to have, because the percentage of cut is so great that you've got to make so many videos that average so many views in order to kind of feel that it's worthwhile. Now that, you know, do people want to be full-time YouTubers all day, every day, every year, forever? I think they'd struggle to find people who want to make original content. They would want to pigeonhole themselves to do something all year round. Especially if you want original content creators, they're not going to do something that's going to pigeonhole them for years on end. They want to move on to another project. That's certainly how I feel about things. But, you know, as I say, if their remit and how they made their money is by having the ability for anyone to upload at any time, why would they need to care about creating original content? They don't really have to. I think it's because people say that YouTube is a network, just like, you know, Netflix and Hulu are, and obviously worrying TV networks, because they have to care about, you know, internet content and having stuff being available on the internet. And YouTube is available everywhere other than the odd countries that have banned it. So the issue you've got as a content creator is, do you create content that you're 100% proud of and you're in control of and have to make your own money without them? Or do you put your content on YouTube and be prepared to sacrifice a large percentage of your what's going to be your revenue to give to them, just for having the privilege of doing something you already can do. They're just basically activating a thing that says we'll give you some of the ad revenue that we already get anyway. It's a bizarre, to me it's a really bizarre model, and it's I think one of the reasons why it hasn't really fully worked, and people are looking at other ways of doing it, and obviously other websites have took advantage of that. I personally really like the Twitch model. I think the Twitch model of having a subscription and knowing that it's about gaming really works well. So it's really interesting. And again, like I say, I just ultimately don't think YouTube and various other ones don't really care. They may dispute that and say, well, look, we reinvested it, but like I say, are they really reinvesting in it, or is it something they can easily get the money back, and are they investing enough? I really don't think they are. For how much money that company and website generates, there's no real avenue for people to make really great content. Like I say, you can make great content, but it's the time really. The thing that you're spending money on now is people's time and energy and commitment and other human beings. You're spending manpower basically. That's what costs now. It's not the equipment, it's the time and effort it takes. And that's why, in order to have some sort of a career on YouTube, you have to spend the whole entire year uploading stuff to get any form of revenue back. And as someone who has other interests and wants to create a scope for this thing, I like using YouTube as an avenue for people to see my audience, but is it a viable place for me to make money? And I don't mean make money as in shafting people. I just mean making money back for the time I put in, and it's very difficult to do. Whereas there's other websites and other models where I think that's much more achievable, and I just don't think YouTube spend enough time thinking about it, because like I say, I really don't think they care. But with podcasting, you just got to convince people that your content's worth giving money to, in return for having 100% control over it. Because you go to an advertiser and say, give me this much for this because I have this number of views. And it's up to them whether to say yes or no, and it's a much more simpler process than going, we'll give you 35% of whatever this is, and it becomes unnecessarily complicated. It's a really interesting subject, so it depends how you look at it, but yeah, that's my take on it.
What advice would you give to people just starting out?
The advice I'd give for people starting out is just do it. If you're feeling unsure about doing something, go and do it. Go and do it regardless of what other people say. If you think about anyone that ends up on the front of magazines, they're on the front of the magazine because they've just not let people deter them from pursuing their goal and their dream. And very often people that are against you and say you can't do something are people who are afraid themselves. I mean, why would they say that? If anyone comes up to me and says, even friends who say, I want to do this, and I'm really, really, really passionate about it, and I'm being totally serious, and I'm going to be 100% committed to it, I'm not going to sit them down and say why that's awful. I'm going to go, fuck, yeah, do it, mate, do it, and I'll 100% back you and be behind you, and if I can help, I'll even chip in. That's what I want to create with this, ultimately, is I want to create an environment where people can come to me and go, I've got this idea, and I can help them make that happen. And can you imagine if more companies had that mindset? I really think it would make the world such a great place, because you just have the creativity level would be amazing, and you'd get the really talented people coming out of their shell and going and showcasing what they can do. And I think there's so much talent, in the UK that's just not being able to be exposed because there just isn't an avenue for it, and that's where I think the gap in the market is. And so that's why, if you want to go and do it. And as I said, you've got, with the equipment being what it is and the way the economy is, there's not a greater time to do it than now. There's no real excuse. You've got no real excuse, because the technology level is at such a great standard now. You don't have to be you don't have to have a computer science degree to do this. You just need to have a little bit of patience and a little bit of working some things out. But if you've got intuition and you've got a little bit of common sense, you can do this. And I get asked this quite regularly, and the only way you're going to get better at it is to do it. And the only way you're going to do it, the only way you're going to have something that anyone's going to care about, do it. You have to do it first. You can't just there's so many people that come up with ideas. No people in your life who'll do this. They'll come up to you and go, I've got this idea. What is it? And it's this, and they'll explain it, and you go, that sounds really cool, and then that's the last you'll ever hear of it, because they won't do it, because we're a world of ideas, but we're not a world of action. So the only people that are different are the people who put their actions where their words are and actually go and do it. So go and do it if you're thinking about doing it, and what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is you may fall and look like an idiot some of the time, and you will do when you first start. It's not easy, and you have to be 100% committed to it, and you have to put time and effort into it, and you've got to constantly think about it and second guess yourself. But that's the challenge, and that's what's fun, is figuring out how to make it good and how to make it better and how to progress and think of something to do. And that's the great joy of it. There's nothing funner than having the satisfaction of knowing that you created it, and the stuff that you're doing you created from scratch. So I also say, don't get disillusioned and don't get disheartened by if you first start and you don't get hardly any people interested, because I often say to people when they first start out, if they do, when you first start, nobody cares that you're doing it. Nobody will care. Obviously you might have people who support you, which is great, but I'm on about anyone who doesn't know you will not care, and you have to convince them to care. And that's the mindset you have to have. You can't expect to be the Justin Biebers who get overnight sensations. That just happens once in a blue moon. You can't. That's why these reality shows paint a picture that's unrealistic. The rest of it comes through. The rest of the people who become well known, it becomes through hard work and perseverance. That's what it takes, and people just don't like hearing that. But if you do something you want to do, hard work and commitment comes second nature to something you really want to do. And anything that I do in relation to this is easy for me. It's not difficult at all. It's hard work, and it makes me tired, and it's stressful and all the other stuff. But when you wake up and kind of want to tackle the day because it's difficult, because bad stuff's going to happen and stuff's going to go wrong, that's really cool. It's really awesome, and it makes it fun. So if you want to do something, no matter what it is, go and do it. And if it's a podcast or anything like that, once you do it, let me know and invite me on your show. Invite me on your show. I'd love to be a guest. Because I hope that influences you to do it. Because that's sometimes all it takes, is someone to push you and go, you know what, just do it. Who cares what people think? Because people are going to be against you. People are going to say that it's a stupid idea. But how many stupid ideas have become multimillionaires? Everything starts as someone going, what a ridiculous idea. You have to ignore that and just pursue whatever it is you want to do. Because it's your dream, not theirs. So they have no right to say that you shouldn't do it.
Why do you think they've become so popular?
I think podcasts have become so popular because of the honesty of it. Like I say, when you listen to a radio show, they're so generic and similar, especially in the UK. I've always find this interesting, this point I make, that no one ever really listens to radio shows anymore to listen to the presenters. It's about the station and what music they play. So the music really is the overriding factor in a lot of radio stations these days. So no one cares about the hosts. I've never seen anyone go, I'm going to listen to such and such a show. I'm going to go, oh, let's put it on such and such a station. Whereas in podcasting, it's so personal, and it's so, my podcast has me embedded in all of it. It's my personality, it's my music, it's, the guests, the people I like. And that's the thing, is that it's a byproduct of the person that's hosting. So it's a lot determined on whether you like the host, is whether you like the podcast. Obviously, if someone comes on who you're a fan of, you might just, go, well, I'm not a huge fan of that person, but I like the guest, so I'll listen to it anyway. So that can happen, but for the majority of the time it is that if you like the format of it and what it talks about and the type of structure it has, but ultimately it comes down to the personality of the host, and because it's embedded in a lot of podcasts and that's what I love about it, and that is why I think you don't get the same show with a podcast. It's not generic and it's not manufactured. It's not sticking to a formula. The formula is whatever you want it to be, and that's what makes it so fantastic. Is that, you know, you can listen to Nerdist, and that's like three comedian guys who talk about nerd related stuff. Then you got Joe Rogan, who predominantly talks on his own with another person, and it's 3 hours long, and it's really thought provoking and interesting, and a lot of the time he has people on that I don't know, and I get to know more about a certain subject. Or you get like, you know, Mark Maron's, which is, you know, quite honest and interesting, and then you get all the wrestling ones where they talk about sort of the wrestling angles of stuff that I used to grow up watching. So it's a little bit sort of historical and funny, and obviously you got, you know, there's little comedy ones and like the sports ones now. You know, there's what I find interesting is that you can tell how popular they are because you got like mainstream sports shows doing podcast versions of like a review show they're doing, because they realise the power of audio, the power of conversation. So you know when it's popular when you got mainstream shows that really you think wouldn't fit an audio version that are being put on iTunes as audio versions of themselves, because they understand how popular they got. So it's really interesting, and I just think it comes down to that again, this human aspect of we've been spoon fed answers and just generic questions for so long, and reality shows that are all the same. Because podcast is original content, because it's original people and it's different people. If you look at any mainstream media for TV or whatever it is, very often they're copycats. So if something sells well, like let's say X Factor or something, you'll just find them mimicking themselves by doing their own slight variation of that on their channel, and then trying to get a slice of that pie, as it were. But it's not an original idea. You know, this has been going on for nearly 15 years now, like all these reality, you know, talent shows. It's not changed in 15 years, whereas I've listened to podcasts from the day that they started to now, and they've progressed and changed and developed and evolved, and just like the people, because when the people change, the podcast changes as well, because it's that personal, and it's that literally like me to you, a one-on-one discussion, and you feel really involved. You know, that's as a listener of other people's podcasts, that's how I feel when I listen. So it was one of the big reasons why I got involved in podcasting, because that's the feeling it gave us.
What's your most memorable topic you've ever recorded?
I think the topic that comes up the most in my stuff is mental health, because because I'm not afraid of talking about my own mental health troubles. I mean, I had a period of time when I was not doing anything at all, because I was in hospital for various different reasons. And so I'm most proud of that, because it's something I'm involved in, and I do a radio show in Newcastle talking about mental health, and I'm really proud of the help I've gave people. You know, not just getting emails from people playing board games saying their family have got back together, but also people saying that I've made their life easier by being honest and open about my mental health and not being afraid to talk about it, and I love that. I'm really not bothered at all by being honest, and you know, I can be perceived as brutal as much as people want me to, but I'm not bothered. And I think because I'm open and honest about talking about subjects like that, and we've had more sort of, you can say, difficult conversations come up in the show, and I think because I'm so open and I want to be kind and I'm respectful of it, and I sometimes say if I want something to be brought up, I'll mention it before the show starts, and that's the only thing I ever ask people before we start, is that, are you okay with us talking about this? And it doesn't bother me if they say no, because that's their entitlement. But the reason I say that is because I'm like, anything will come up, but obviously this is something that's hanging over us, so yeah, I just let them know that anything can come up at any time. So yeah, I'm really proud of mental health, and like I said, it's become a part of my life now, of sort of letting people aware of it and sort of trying to destroy the sort of stigma and discrimination that happens with it. And I'm really, you know, honoured that, you know, I've been asked to talk about it at places and be involved in this radio show, and I'm incredibly proud of that, and for all the stick I get for being open about it and be criticised for it, I don't care, because I care more about the emails that tell me that I've made a difference than the people who say that it's not right for me to be open and honest and criticise people for the way people treat things. You know, what is criticising someone when someone's life's in danger? You know, I look at it from a perspective point of view that, you know, I'm not the only one that goes through this. You know, if I'm criticising one person, then that's completely different to people, to a subject that affects millions and millions of people. And the person I'm criticising probably knows somebody who is dealing with a similar thing and are being discriminatory and don't care and think it doesn't exist, or think they can't do anything about it and can't help, or think they're being mavericks about it. And you know, I just want people to know the right information, because the problem is that the information out there is wrong, and is just not correct. So, you know, that's something I feel that we're responsible as people who suffer mental health, is to get the information out there. I think people think it's to change people's minds who don't have mental health, but I'm more concerned about the people who have mental health, who feel they're alone and feel that they have no one out there that wants to know. And I want that to change, because I definitely felt that way. I don't deny that. I definitely felt that way a lot of the time. So yeah, I'm really proud of the fact that my podcast is known for being honest and open, and mental health is a common thread in it. But I hope my podcast shows that with all the stuff that we talk about, it's just a small part of our lives, and it's horrible, and it's something we deal with. Not everybody, but I'm just saying people who brought it up. So yeah, I'm really proud about the mental health angle, and that, you know, people aren't afraid of talking about it. It comes up fairly often, and I'm happy to do that. But just to clarify, it doesn't always come in every show. It's not a remit of mine where I'm like, we must mention it. So not all the time, but it's good. I think it's good that we broach the subject, and it helps people.
What's the worst topic you've ever talked about?
Don't really think there's been a worst topic we've ever covered. Like I say, there's stuff come up that's been controversial, but I wouldn't say there's ever been a topic where I've went, this is rubbish. I mean, obviously there's been certain situations in conversations where I've went, this is ridiculous, and why are we talking about this, but very little. So no, I don't think there's ever been any topics that have been stuff where I've went, why have we talked about this? It's never really happened.
What's the best podcast you've produced? I don't know. About the best podcast I've ever produced, it depends how you ask. For example, if you're asking me personally, I would say, you know, whenever I've talked about mental health, and being open about that, from my experiences and being honest, and I've had great responses from that, which is not the reason I do it, but it's nice to know that, you know, I just mean having people say that it means something to me, telling my story. But not only that, but from a geek perspective, if I'm sort of, you know, talking to my inner child in here, when I got invited to the Red Dwarf convention and I got to interview the majority of the Red Dwarf cast, I was a huge fan of that show growing up. It was our family show that we all watched together, and I think that was really the only time I've ever felt unprofessional, so much so that the person I was with at the time, as we were walking into the convention, I did like a geek dance. It was not too much like that, where I was literally like, yeah, this is great, and it was just really involuntary, and I just kind of went crazy, and I was so excited to meet people who I grew up watching on TV. So that's the huge benefit of doing something like this. You get to meet people you admire and appreciate for bringing people together, which I think is the biggest power any form of art can do. So yeah, the Red Dwarf one was cool.
Meeting Chris Rowe, who is my musical hero. He plays for a band, the Ataris. He did a gig in Newcastle and managed to get my friend Wayne managed to get me an interview with him for 40 minutes before the show started, and then I got to watch him perform. It was one of the greatest nights of my life. I loved it. I still think about that day, like, you know, it's one of the greatest days I'll probably ever have. Hopefully I get to speak to him again and relive that moment, because and hopefully one day I'll get to hire him to do a gig. But yeah, that was awesome. So it depends how you ask it, really. I like all the shows we've done. I've never looked at any particular show and said I wish we hadn't have done that. I mean, I'd say I've had difficult guests, especially conventions where you kind of meet people at the wrong time and they're kind of like, oh, I'm not really up for it. So that can be kind of difficult, even in just talking for 10 minutes. So that can be difficult, but there you go. But no, yeah, there's a bunch of different suggestions there, but depends how you ask it is the way I'd like to say it.
What's the best question you've ever asked or have been asked?
I don't know, the best question I've ever asked. I'm not really sure. I mean, one of the things I think that makes podcasting really great is the which you haven't touched on, is that the audience participation. It's one of the things I most enjoy about it. Like when we interviewed Ryan Day, for example, who's part of Geek and Sundry's friend, brother to Felicia Day, who runs Geek and Sundry, did the Guild and various other things. When we spoke to him and the Geek and Sundry fans, they had the greatest questions. Same with the Red Dwarf fans who emailed in at that time when Chris Barry and that was on, and it's just, I love the geek community in that regard, and I love people who care about stuff because they ask the most interesting questions. It makes my job far easier. Like, we had a question that I really found interesting, but Ryan, in fact, I can understand him not answering it completely, but remember once a guy in Gateshead sent a question in when Ryan was on, basically saying, has Felicia changed since you become so well known, having like 2.5 million Twitter followers and all that kind of stuff? And he kind of said, well, you have to ask her because she'll know better than me, but he's basically just saying she's still the sister she was. I just thought that was a really interesting question, because someone like a sibling would notice a change, she seems to be the same person from afar, but obviously someone like him will know more than anyone. And I just thought that was a really insightful question, and some of the stuff that they ask is just incredible. So I think the best questions are usually, and I'm not selling myself short, but a lot of the questions come from fans that really interest me, and obviously I incorporate them into the show, and as I say, it makes my job a hell of a lot easier, so I'm more for it, really. But yeah, it's definitely come from fan questions. There was a lot on the Red Dwarf one that I thought was really interesting, and obviously, different people who have different fans, so it was incredibly rewarding. So yeah, I think one of the key elements about podcasting is fan participation. I think it's the best one.
Now, what is the worst question you've ever been asked?
I've probably asked 1 million terrible questions. So I can't really think of a specific one, but I guess when I'm sort of flustered, if a conversation is not really going anywhere and I feel like I need to fill a gap, I'm sure at some point I've said something like, so, what you been up to, or I don't know, something very sort of generic that I kind of went, why didn't I say that? But if you're doing a 2-hour podcast, it's gonna peak and trough, like that's just common sense. So you're gonna end up saying sort of questions like that. So I don't really mind. But yeah, so I don't really know. I can't really think of anything where I've kind of went, ooh, why do you say that? It's a bit controversial. Because one of the benefits of podcasting as well is you get an instant reaction. So if you say something that someone doesn't like, they very often will say it on the show, and I'll elaborate and say, oh, I didn't mean like that, I mean it like this. So that's what's interesting.
How do you prepare for interviews with guests on your show?
Yeah, preparing for interviews. I always say to people, see, I don't prepare very much, but that benefits me and my my style. I really hate that word because I don't really like style. You only think it is the style, it's just who you are. But I have a very conversational style, and I think I have one of my friends described it really well as like I have a very disarming quality about me, that I disarm people's defenses and get them comfortable. And I'm not doing that to be horrible. I'm doing that because I want them to be comfortable on the show and to talk about whatever it is they want to talk about. So I'm really pleased I have that quality. I mean, obviously I'll do my research, but the advantage of podcasting with a podcast I've made is that the guests I have on are people I want to have on. So I very often know what they've done already before they've been on. So they're either friends of mine, people I've met who I kind of have a vague idea of what they do, or they're well-known people who, you know, sometimes in some cases don't need any introduction, or at least not for the majority of people. So yeah, but I always say to people, especially if you're starting out and trying to figure out what the best way of doing it is, try to find what works for you. So if you feel comfortable talking, doing it in question form and going off a sheet, then by all means start that way. But if you find yourself going back to that and missing out on killer answers that you can elaborate on and ask a question around what they say, you know, I personally think that's a better way of doing it, but it doesn't mean that way can't be good. You know, I watch people who do have set questions and they've got a great way of delivering it, so it doesn't look like it's scripted when I know that it is, and I've seen them with scripts. And I love certain podcasts like certain interview people like that. There's a great guy called Juan Gameshi, who I'm a huge fan of, who does a radio show in Canada that's quite scripted, but he has such a great technique, it doesn't look very scripted. And I'm interested to know how much scripted it actually is, but I obviously don't know that for sure. But yeah, so I always like Larry King's approach of saying that like his way was very improvised and very sort of like, I'll ask little questions and then ask a question I really wanted to ask. It's kind of disarm people in that sense. But just talk to them like they're normal, like they're another human being. I find that incredibly useful because it's incredibly respectful as well. Sort of like talk to them like you would talk a friend. And that's kind of my personality anyway, so that's what I think works for me. But you often got stick from other people who did do things with questions and say, you know, are you attacking us for doing the question way? And he's like, not at all. And I'm not either. I'm saying if that's what you want to do and it works and you think it makes the best content for you, then stick with that. But if you find yourself doing them set questions and then wanting to work your way around it and you feel that you're just using it as a security blanket because you're afraid, then I really think you're shooting yourself in the foot. So do that. Get around it by asking what you want to ask and start using less of the set questions. And we have them as a frame of reference if you want, but I don't really think have a halfway house of ask a set question and work our way around it really fully works in my eyes. But do what works for you is the best advice. But yeah, in terms of me, it's like I'll have an idea in my head when we start what questions I'll do, but very often I often listen and respond, which I think gives the best podcast. So because usually when someone responds and gives a really great answer, I'm interested to elaborate on that because we've got time to do that. So I listen and respond is my technique, if you can call it a technique. To me, I just feel it's just being respectful and talk to them. It's a conversation. There you go. But yeah, do what works for you. That's how I'll say to people who are starting out for the first time.
Are there any topics that you wish you could have talked about, but you haven't done so yet?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I wanted to cover in that I haven't covered yet. One of the things that I wanted to do when I was in community radio, for example, was talking to a scientist, and that's something I'm trying to work on. I've been talking to Newcastle University about getting somebody on because it's a hobby of mine to talk about. One of the things I've been wanting to cover is is science, for example, and that was one of the things that community radio was very limiting in, is that it was difficult to get people to come on the show and be allowed to do it, you know, with restrictions and whatnot. And that's something I've wanted to pursue on the podcast, because that's a hobby and passion of mine, to read about physics and particle and quantum physics and particles and atoms and the universe and the Big Bang and how the planets were created and all the different spectrums of light and all that stuff really, really fascinates me, and how things work on a molecular level, and how we work as human beings, and how the chemical interaction we have within our bodies and with each other, and all that kind of stuff fascinates me as a layman, and as a layman I want to talk to someone who knows what they're talking about, and try and see how far I can keep up with them, as it were. So I've been talking to Newcastle University for a while about trying to get that to happen, and it's really sort of difficult, because I think a lot of them work in Durham Uni, which is a bit bizarre. So it's kind of like sort of really difficult to get them to be interested, but well, not interested, but make the time. I've communicated with them and said that if it was possible to try and make it happen, but it's just making the time. You know, it's like a lot of people who are, you know, a lot of people declare their interest in being on, and it just comes down to logistics of making it happen. But yeah, that is definitely sciencey stuff. I mean, I'm sort of halfway there in that I've provisionally agreed to have a clinical psychologist on the show. So I've got a doctor. And I've had a doctor on before, actually. There was a doctor who was a head teacher of a school who was a doctor. So, you know, dare I say, maybe a little bit more intellectually above me, which isn't exactly hard, but I like talking to people of that nature, not just sort of have, you know, silly jokes about geeky subjects as well. I want to talk about serious stuff as well as the fun stuff. So yeah, definitely science stuff is something I would like to explore, and that's definitely something I'm looking into doing.
Were there any significant low points in your recording thus far?
I guess the significant low point for me was not being able to do the podcasts. Having been in hospital for towards the end of last year, and only really sort of recovered from it, I'd say, in the last month or so, and still kind of recovering now to some degree, was the most difficult. And ever since I've been back involved in doing it, I've regretted not being a part of it. It's something I've really been disappointed with myself that, but you know, the stuff that happened to me was out of my hands, and so, you know, I can't really beat myself up too much about it because I had no real say in it. So I'm just really happy to be given the opportunity again, and you know, creating the opportunity for myself again, I suppose. So it's not really I'm not asking for anyone's permission, but yeah, the hardest part was not being able to do it. And you don't really ever care about something until it's gone, at least like to notice that it's there, that you really, really care about. And you know, there was a lot of stuff in the last 6 months that had been taken from me that meant a great deal to me. Some of it I managed to get back, some of it I didn't, and I'm still sort of I'm still struggling to accept that to some degree, but having part of my life being restored, and the stuff that I lost during that period of time has done wonders for me becoming the person I am. And if you see sort of pictures of me from 6 months ago where I was in hospital and struggling to stay alive, to be honest, to now get to the point where I'm having this interview and feeling proud again of the stuff that I do. It's, you know, it's light and day, quite literally. You know, it couldn't be more polar opposite really. So I'm grateful for the opportunity again, but yeah, I was sad during that time for not. So I guess that's the worst part, not being able to do something you really want to do. Definitely.
Do you think that podcasts will continue to become more popular?
Yeah, I really do think podcasts will get more popular. How much more popular is difficult to say. It's difficult to predict anything like that. But what I will say is that the scope for the scope for doing stuff is really interesting. You know, where can it possibly go? Who's to say? But what I'm hoping will happen in the UK anyway, because America's kind of got it set in stone. I mean, as I say, that's part of their culture now, and you know, loads and loads of people have got podcasts, and loads of people are wanting to do podcasts, and have jumped on the bandwagon and realised the value and being able to connect with their fans at a real one-on-one level. You know, content straight to the audience, which is obviously the huge benefit, which is why, you know, Kickstarter and various other things has become popular, because it cuts out the middle person. I mean, there's ramifications for that, which is interesting, that not many people think about, but we'll not go into that. But one of the things I love about it is, like I say, the advantage is that it comes down to people who, it's about in people's individual personality. So the idea of someone coming along with a show and going, my show won't fit there. Of course it will, because you're an individual and you're different. You don't want to like make a carbon replica of someone else's podcast, but you never can, because it's you. I mean, obviously, if you like you think you'd on a persona or someone, then obviously that's completely different, and I'd question doing that, why you want to do that. But I've had people in the past say, I'm going to start a podcast, and are you worried about me starting a podcast? I'm like, no, because I can't be worried about people who are doing podcasts, because I'm not worried, because I know that my podcast is different to yours. I'm not saying it's better than yours, I'm saying it's different. Just as much as yours is going to be different to mine, and that means there's going to be some points about your podcast that some people will prefer, and there'll be some people that prefer my way of doing things. And the way that I look at it is, which a lot of people I think don't spend any time thinking about, is more podcasts is better for everybody. Because the UK podcasting scene compared to America is nowhere near as advanced. I mean, you obviously got the problem of, it's not a problem, it's the fact that America is much larger, so the scale of amount of podcasters are going to be a lot higher, obviously. But in terms of people getting a career, or at least being noticed for having a podcast over here, it doesn't happen. You know, Richard Herring has a really great podcast, and he's the one I kind of most hear about. And I mean, no disrespect to Richard, but it's like he's becoming known for that, I think, because he's just not on TV as much anymore. And you know, he helps promote his stand-up, so I credit him, because he's doing what American comedians are doing, and he's putting a podcast up to talk about his stuff and what he's doing, and to interview people at Leicester Square, which I really think is a genius idea. I think I really commend him for that. And obviously it'll help with people noticing about him and his stand-up, because I've heard, I know about him, going out and doing his stand-up shows. So it helps him get more noticed in that regard, doing what he wants to do. But what I'm kind of hinting at, and I know that there's people that, people don't solely make money off podcasting, but I'm talking about getting your money back for the amount you put in. So he may not make much money off the podcast, but he knows it has value for what he makes his regular income off. Now, I do podcasting and various other things, and want to do our own individual events, to run events, and we want to get our own performance space and stuff like that. But so we want this to be part of our main income, not as an avenue for people to hear about what we're up to. I mean, that's a part of it, but what I'm saying is it has to be a separate entity as well, whereas it might not bother him as much, because everyone that has a podcast over in America, sort of the main ones, Joe Rogan is a stand-up comedian, so he'll promote his stand-up comedy shows there. Chris Hardwick is a stand-up comedian, he'll promote his shows there, and he'll promote all the nerdist stuff that he does. But it's a separate entity as well, and it generates money that way. So can that happen over here? Can we have a normal person I hate the word normal, but you know what I mean, like someone who's not well known already for one particular thing, who's not a celebrity, can be known solely for doing a podcast in a national way. And I don't think the avenue's there for them to do. I don't think the avenue's there for people to be able to do that. I know people will say, "Oh, well, there's iTunes, so anyone can download it at any time." But how impossible is it for someone like me or anyone else in the UK have a format to go on and say, "We do a podcast"? Would we go on radio and do that? Would they really want to promote podcasting on the radio? So where else can we promote it? We can't exactly go on how can we possibly go on a TV show anywhere in the UK and say we have a podcast? I never hear that on any English shows at all. Where in America, you watch an American talk show, first thing you hear them say is, "Oh, and they have not the first thing, but it's part of the stuff where they go, oh, and they have the podcast on such and such a site, or they have podcast on Nerdist.com," and it's a thing, and it's a thing to be proud of. Where it's still kind of treated as the thing in the corner in England right now. It's accepted, but it's still it's still regarded as the thing in the corner. We'll mention it, but that's as far as it'll go. So it's got somewhere to go in the UK, but I hope it will get there. And I think what will help is hopefully that there will be more well-known people in England who will take up podcasting. Because again, anyone who podcasts and make podcasts relevant in the UK will help everybody. And I know that because there's people who won't think that way. They'll think, well, why would you want more podcasts even? Because you won't make yourself even more unique. And it's like, I'm only making the realistic point of we all need help. Which is why I'll promote anybody who's a fellow podcaster, because that can only benefit me. It's not me looking at it selfishly as well, because I want everybody to do well, and everybody wins. It's not a selfish thing. It's just everybody will win that way. And that's the nicest way of doing things, really. I don't want to crush people because I want to do well. If I crush them, that's gonna not work for me at all. So even if I looked at it self-centeredly, it still wouldn't benefit me to discourage people from podcasting. They should do it. It's a great idea. So yeah, I think it'll become more popular. Whether it can get more popular in America is debatable. I suppose the only other way it could is if it ended up in sort of mainstream, like people podcasted and then podcasted on stuff. But they're kind of already doing that anyway. I don't really see how much further it can go. It happens there all the time. And over here, we've still got somewhere to go. Will it ever catch on? That's really the ultimate question, really. If I had an answer to that, I'd probably be a millionaire now and probably talking to you on my yacht, but I'm not. But we'll see. I certainly hope so, and I'm optimistic, otherwise why would I be doing it? But I'm not going to just get on a plane and go to America and go, you know what, I give up on good old Blighty. No, I'm gonna try and see if it'll work.
And finally, how do you think podcasts must change to continue to be relevant in the future?
Great question to end on in regards to how do you think podcasts will change. Because I actually think the opposite is true. I think podcasting is helped change other stuff to be more relevant than the other way around. What I mean by that is, like, everyone has this debate that podcasting's going to take over conventional radio, and I just don't think that'll happen, because there's too much money embedded in radio, especially in the UK, and people still have that as an acceptable avenue to listen to stuff, and you can listen to stuff online, and so they've got the whole history behind it. So it's like starting a new company up against something that has 60 odd, that has like 10 decades of history, whatever it may be, and that's hard to beat. And so why, how can you convince someone it's worth doing? Because really, the radio over here is a podcasting environment. They just adhere to a certain standard and have certain broadcast rights, but they have a national audience that's difficult to stop. I think what podcasting is doing is making potentially regional radio less influential. Is that a bad thing? I mean, from my personal perspective, I don't like I like virtually no regional radio at all. I think it's pointless. And I think it just sort of fills a void for people going to work in mornings who need something to listen to. I don't, I don't mind saying that. I just find it too generic, and they play the same 20 songs over and over again, and so I think what podcasting has done is, because what they've legitimately, podcasting has made radio stations do is transfer over to the internet to stream online. I don't think they ever would have really truly considered that as a viable form, because they preferred living in the archaic way of frequencies, which is much more expensive. But they're never really going to stop that, because obviously there's radio always still really in cars, and no one's ever going to have the new cars with. And obviously it's just part of our much more part of our culture than America is. I mean, obviously they have their own radio stations in America and all that kind of thing, but it's such a big country that it can pigeonhole in podcasting that has a worldwide audience that we can listen to. So it's big enough to include podcasting without sort of attacking the two and sort of saying you have to choose. Whereas over here, I think podcasting's got a little bit of a difficult fight on its hands, but it shows how influential it is, because it's certainly made radio scared enough to kind of transcend to something similar to podcasting. Or at least it's taught it a few things. But whether it can it won't replace it. I just think I think there's just too much of a history and too much of people who like radio. There's more of a generation of people who know what radio is than podcasting, and that's not going to change anytime soon. But can the people who listen to podcasts in England grow? And I really think they can, because there's a huge audience over here for American podcasts. So why aren't we doing podcasts here? And why aren't we spending money to make it a thing? And television corporations care about it enough that they're putting samples of their programs onto podcasting. For one example, and it's an interesting thing. I really wish that they cared more about it, because for example, they've had people do interviews, for example, hiring American podcasters to come to England to interview English stars to go to put on BBC America to broadcast over there, not here, but they're filming in London. And I'm like, so you've got an English celebrity and you're spending all that money to get an American to go to London. And you wonder why we say that we have a shortage of presenters. Like that time we had the Olympics and the BBC was saying we don't have enough presenters, and because we're not looking to find any talent. And when something comes along that's new, instead of looking at the talent pool that's there, because they don't know how to do that, they'll just ask someone they can know from a different. And who's going to turn that opportunity down? And that will never happen the reverse way. They won't go, well, we need a presenter. Let's go and ask a guy in northeast of England whether he'll come all the way to America. Because obviously I'd say yes, but why the hell would they ask? Why the hell would they ask me? There's going to be someone closer. But why haven't they got that attitude over here? It really bothers me. But again, we're in this sort of industry way of looking at things over here, where that we've got sort of like a traditional view of things, I think that's why we're behind in a lot of stuff. America may be in a great deal of a much more of a financial hole than we are, but they're ahead in a lot of stuff technological wise and sort of the culture of stuff. I often feel that we're really behind and stuff like that. And even sort of Asian countries like China and Japan are a lot far further ahead than us. we don't make anything anymore. I mean, that's the thing that really disappoints me. We don't make anything. You know, say we just mentioned Google and YouTube and various other things. You know, what major company is made here? You know, we don't make anything. We don't have it. I mean, the only company that anyone ever mentions that's like that is Virgin, and that's why I think he gets a lot of credit for being the pioneer of that. I don't know. That really disappoints me when I think of it like that. So hopefully, podcasting will become more relevant in the UK. Whether it can get more popular in America, probably. But how much more? Probably, it might have reached its peak. Who am I to say? You know, I can't predict the future, but let's hope it'll get better in the UK with hopefully, like, podcasters should all get together and promote each other. That's I honestly think that's the way forward. And like I say, a few more famous people guesting on podcasts and making it more of a thing, because I have no problem getting American guests on the show when I mention that we've got a podcast in England. It's really hard to convince an English actor or comedian or whatever, and I'd talk to them. You're more than willing to talk to me, but getting them to do a podcast, really hard. They also have this convention of agents who, you know, if you've got an agent who doesn't know, again, this sort of full circle thing of not treating it seriously because they'll ask their agent, and their agent will go, I don't know, podcasting, what? I don't see the benefit. You know, why can't we'll just go on a radio show that'll have 10 million viewers, 10 million listens, and you can't really argue with that. You know, I can't argue with that. Why? You know, because that's freely available to them in this country. So, you know, how do we bridge that gap? And that's the ultimate question. But let's just keep trying. see how we do. It's the only thing we can do.